What is going on, everyone? Steven here from Techmaker.tv. This is going to be View Components with Rails Part 3. As always, just a quick reminder, if you want to follow along with this project from scratch, you can do that over on our website, www.techmaker.tv. Also, if you like this video and want to see more like it, be sure to give this one a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in with the work that we're going to do today. So in the last episode, we turned this area here into a view component. And this view component contains this other view component, which is the progress badge, if I remember correctly. What I want to do in this episode is create a new component for the tasks. And I think there's a couple, it's going to be really similar, but there's a couple of interesting new things we're going to include with this. Alright, so let's get into it. So let's pop over to the terminal first of all. And so I have two tabs here. So I have one where my server's running, and then I have another one. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new component here, and I'm just going to call it task in this case. So I'm just going to say Rails G component task. And that's going to create the same sort of stuff that it has been. And let's jump back over into the code and take a look at what we have. So we have a new task component HTML template, which just has add a task template here. And then we have our empty task component. So as always, let's go ahead and get the, I believe that's the project show page. So let's get that open, and let's go ahead and just render our component and see if we can get this just to print out. So right here, we'll just print this out right here, I guess. Maybe just inside this if. So we'll render, and we'll say task component dot new, and that's it. So let's save this, and let's go refresh, and let's see what we get. So you can see here we have this add task template here. So that basically just means our component is working. So let's see about how we can just move everything else into it. Okay, so this should be pretty straightforward, right? So let's grab this li tag, which is this whole big thing. And let's grab all of that and cut it. And let's make sure we give this a task and a task. And then let's open up our component over here and then save all of that. And let's see, what else do we need to do? We need to open up our regular component over here. We need to say initialize, and we'll give it a task keyword argument, and then, well, let me spell task right, and then we'll say at task equals task, and then finally we'll give this an attribute reader task. So let's see what we missed here. So we've got our, basically what's essentially, you would normally call this like a partial, but this is the template for this component. It looks like it's only really dealing with the task in here. So I think this might work. So let's just refresh and see what happens. So it loads properly, and we can still drag and drop, and that saves. Let's refresh just to double check. Looks like that's all still working. So cool, looks good. So I want to show you something cool that I've found about this library. So right now we have this if task.persisted right here. So let's take this away, and let's take a look at what happens if we go back and refresh. So it looks like it's still working, but we kind of have a halfway trick that's happening. So if we look back at our code, I believe that this .order position ascending is sort of tricking us, because I think that by default that's going to exclude records that aren't saved. If we take that away for a second, which since we put this in a component, we could imagine someone using it in another context, right? So we don't want there to be like accidental tricks or surprises about behavior. So if we refresh now, we get this error because it's telling us there's no ID. Essentially, so there's no ID for this for this task, and therefore it doesn't know what to do, and that's just because the task actually doesn't exist. I think we can do tasks down here, and we'll see that the ID is nil, which means it's not saved yet. And that's why we had this persisted. Now let's go ahead and let's leave it alone for now. We'll put it back in a second. Let me go ahead and like put a comment right here and just paste that and save it so I don't forget it. We'll put it back later. But for now, I want to leave this error in here. So to fix it, let's go over to our task component. Now this is a cool trick. So what we can do is define a method called render question mark, and we can ask it, or what we can do is specify a rule for when this should render. And so what we can say is what we had in the loop where we say task.persisted. So don't render it if the task isn't persisted. So let's refresh. So now we get our view working again. Now what's great about this is we're explicitly declaring the rules for when this thing should be rendered. So we've removed that from the view, which it was explicit before, but you could imagine that if somebody, I've lost myself, where am I? Here we go. You can imagine that if somebody else later is rendering a list of task components, they might not want to order them by position for some reason, or they might do something else, and it might surprise them that there's this bug. And what we've done is we've just taken care of that at the component level. So I like that. It's pretty cool. And now we can put this back and it will maintain its ordering, and that's great. So cool. So that was one of the newer things I wanted to look at. So the game plan for the rest of this episode is basically to just refactor that component that we just made, and maybe add one more component for this drop down over here. We'll see. I'm not sure. You know, since it's not really used anywhere else, I'm not sure it warrants it. So maybe we won't. I don't know. We'll see what we feel like. But in any case, I want to refactor this task component. So what we did in the last episode I thought was pretty nice, because we were basically moving some of the methods back into this component. And what we have, if we look carefully, is if we go over to our task class, our task model, we have a bunch of view related stuff in here. So we have this readable status, we have this color class, which is actually duplicated from another place. So let's try to remove some of that. So the first thing I want to do, so let's just kind of start by going from the top to the bottom and moving some of this stuff into methods. And I'm going to go ahead and close a couple of things here. Let's move this component over there, and then I'm going to close that controller. Okay, cool. So what I want to do is just kind of start and go from the top to the bottom and define methods for things. So what we can do here is say, so we want to do status, and we'll say task.status, and then we'll change this to be status. And then let's say color class is task.colorClass. And before we call it that, actually, what do we call that over in our... So we have this badge color. So maybe that could actually be called color class or something in the future. We're going to end up with a little bit of duplication for now, but I'm just going to kind of keep it simple here. So we'll say color class, and then we'll say task.colorClass, and we're going to move that logic into this file momentarily. And then we'll just change this to be color class. Readable status, we'll do the same thing. If you want to skip ahead a little bit, you can kind of see the pattern that we're following here. Feel free to, but I'm going to go ahead and build this out. Right here for the status options, I'm going to define something called status options, and we'll bump that over here. And maybe we will put this in its own component. I haven't fully decided yet. The task ID, I feel like we could put into a method like this. And then we'll say task ID, and we'll just say task.id. And then last we have project task, so we can make the project the task.project. Basically we're just delegating a lot of stuff over to to the task. The idea behind this really is to minimize the amount of methods that are being called, or really to eliminate the amount of methods, or all of the methods being called inside of the actual template. That's at least my guiding idea right now. We'll see how it goes. Then we have name, and we have task.name. And description is task.description. So let's save that. Actually, let's make sure that we just take these away here like this. And let's go refresh and see what happens. So exactly the same, so we're all good. So let's jump back over to the code here. And let's look at what we've got in our, close that. So right here we have this readable status. Let's actually just copy this method, or cut it rather. I've done that before and messed up, but I think in this case I know what I'm doing. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And we'll just not paste it there. That doesn't make any sense. Where was I? Readable status. Okay, so let's save that and let's go back and just refresh really quick. So to be clear, refreshing the page is not the same as running tests, so I'm definitely not doing this app in a TDD fashion right now, so keep that in mind. But in any case, at least we know that that works for the moment. So let's see, what else? We have this color class, so let's go ahead and cut this as well and save that, and then let's bring that over here and paste it in here. What I like about this is that we're actually now putting view related logic into a class that's related to the view, so it's not back in the model, which is the model's primary responsibility. I mean, if you just look at what it inherits from application record, which is made for talking to the database. So I'm a big believer in the single responsibility principle as much as possible, and models tend to be this junk drawer for everything in Rails. So I do like the fact that now we have a place to put view related code that's not the view. And there's obviously been presenters and all this sort of stuff before, but I kind of like this structure a little bit better. Okay, so that's pretty good. So like I was saying before, this color class, as well as the badge component badge color, the functionality is essentially the same at the moment, and I imagine that they'll remain the same. So what we might do in the future is actually extract that into some kind of module that we can include. I think you can make something with helpers in here, so we'll see about that, but I think that gets this file, cleaned up a little bit more anyway. So what I think I want to do is go ahead and put this whole contraption right here into its own component and just kind of see where that leads us, because I think that'll be kind of interesting. So let's create a component called what is it? It's like status changer or something like that. Status changer component, something along those lines. Let's see, we've got a change method over on stimulus reflex, and it's dealing with status options. So I'm okay with status changer. I tend to worry about what things are named, so we'll generate a new component. I just cycled up on my terminal in case you didn't see that. So we'll say status changer. And let's get a look at what that gave us. It's the same stuff as before. I'm going to skip my sanity check against my typical better judgment here, and just copy and paste all of this in there. So let's cut it. I should say cut and paste, not copy and paste rather. And then in the status changer component, we'll paste it all. So what are we missing, right? So now we're missing a readable status, status options, the color class, the task ID. So that kind of, now we have all this like dependency over on the task, which is kind of not great. So let's do something terrible and copy all of those methods. Let's actually do this. This is going to be awful, and then we're going to refactor it. So let's copy the initialize bit here. Status changer component. And then let's look at what else we need. So we have this task component. So we're going to do a big old copy and paste here. So let me look at one more time what I need. So I need so I'm going to have the color class, readable status, and status options and task ID. So my task, so we have the readable status, status options, task ID. So that's at least some of it. Okay, so boom, copy and paste. And then what else? I missed one, the color class. So let's grab the color class right here, and we will paste it right there. Okay, so now what we should be able to do is in our task component right here, we should be able to render and then status changer component dot new task. And let's go back and refresh, and fingers crossed that actually worked. No, we missed something. Case status. So we need the status as well from the task component. So let's come down here and just paste that in there, and let's refresh one more time. So now we've got everything. And if we click on these, still works. Cool. So that's great. So let's go clean up the mess we just made by copying and pasting all that stuff. So let's evaluate what's really going on here. So we've got a task that we passed in, and what are we actually using it for? Well, for this method, we're using a status. For this method, we're using a status. For this method, we're actually calling out to the class. And then here we're just calling the task ID, and here we're actually defining the status. So let's do this. Let's actually go back over to our task component. And instead of giving this the task, let's give it the task ID, which is going to be the task ID. And then let's give it the status, which is going to be the status. Then instead of accepting the task, let's accept the task ID and a status. And then we'll make this task ID and status up here. And then this will be task ID and task ID. And then it'll be at status equals status. Okay, and then down here we definitely don't need this, and we don't need this. Alright, now let's go back and let's refresh again just to make sure we didn't break anything obvious. And then over here, we don't need the status options, right? What else do we not need? We're printing out the readable status here, but as it stands, I don't believe we're printing anything out in here about it in the actual task component. So what we can do is get rid of readable status from task component. And one thing I'll point out is that now we have this color class or some version of that in 3 different components. So we definitely need to extract that to be somewhere else. I don't know that I'm going to do that right this second, but just put a pin in that and we'll do that later. Let's see, what other kind of duplication do we have? So we definitely have this duplicated, but the other 2 methods actually aren't duplicated anymore. Let's look at this though and see what else we might be able to do. So I know that we've kind of built this semi-small app, actually it's a pretty small app, from scratch over a series of episodes here, but imagine you're working in a bigger environment. You might see something like this where you have status 1, status 0, and you go, oh, that's ugly, I would like to have something more readable. and think to yourself, I know what I'll do. I'll go over to the task class and I'll change the status options array to be something different. The problem is if you're in a bigger context, you don't necessarily know if something else is using that very easily or whatever. So why don't we actually try to change it up a bit on the component side? That might be a nice thing to do. So what we could do is, let's take a look at that though. So we have the readable version and then the slugged version basically for the status options. So what can we call that? So we could have like, let's say that we want to have this. We want to have status dot slugged, and then here we want to have status dot readable, like that. And then even, well, that might be about as far as we get with that actually. So let's take a look at how we could do that. So if we jump back over here to our status changer component, so the status options, what we could do is do something like this, where we say status options map do option, and then we could actually return back a struct dot new, which has the arguments, what do we call that, slugged and readable, and then we'll pass in let's say new, and then just pass in option like that, which I think is basically going to turn that in. What's the argument? So I think it's readable and then slugged actually. Yeah, so it should be readable and then slugged. So basically the splat operator is going to turn the array into a list of arguments. Let's go refresh, make sure I'm not crazy. So it works just as we would like. Cool. So now our status over here is a lot more easy to understand by just looking at it. And again, the benefit of this style is basically that, you know, somebody could be using this. I think I said earlier that, you know, you might not know if somebody's using it. That's not really true. I mean, you can global find and see what's using it, but imagine that something is using it, and that means you would have to change how that's being used, and it gets really complicated. So what's nice here is we don't have to touch it. Just leave it alone. This, you know, the other things are depending on this. Fine, we don't have to worry about it. In our little view component over here, we can change this up and give it our own, you know, kind of formatting. And essentially what this is just a formatter. In this case, we're just saying we want to actually have this be a little bit more readable, so let's take the raw thing from the model and turn it into something that's understandable. So that's pretty nice. I think I'm going to go ahead and stop here for this episode. Like I was saying, there's some of this where we want to clean it up a bit. I'm getting a lot of these task dot something, so you might want to push those over into like delegate those in a different way so the code is a little bit shorter. And I think we do want to probably kick this up into some kind of module. We'll need to work on the naming because we have the same logic in different places, but the method names are different. But anyway, yeah, I think that that's starting to kind of come together. I kind of like it. Just trying to see if there's any last stuff that I want to do, but if I find it, I'll put out a part 4 for the view components or something like that. But this has been really interesting for me. I hope that you've enjoyed this. After today, I'm going to get back into, I think, the building a blog series for a couple of days, and then we'll jump back over into the note-taking app. So if you're interested in those and you haven't subscribed, be sure to do that. Also leave a comment if you want, and be sure to like the video. All of those things help me out tremendously. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.